This story is titled, My Wife's Rich Family Demanded that I sign a prenuptial agreement, and she cheated. Now she is begging to reconcile because I am leaving her penniless. Alright, I don't even know how to begin this. But I'm sitting here at 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling, and I can't get the anger out of my head. I never thought I'd be the guy posting about his life falling apart on the internet. But here I am. My 47 million wife, 45 female, of over 20 years cheated on me. Let me just put that out there. 20 freaking years. I trusted her with everything. My time, my love, my kids, and she blew it up for some guy who's closer to our kids' age than hers. I don't even think I'm fully angry yet. It's more like a dull, numb ache that's taking its sweet time to hit me properly. But here's where the story starts. Way before all this mess. Before the betrayal. Before the cheating. Before everything fell apart. So my wife and I got married in our early 20s. We met in college. Typical story, I guess. I didn't have much growing up. My parents were hardworking people, but we weren't rich. My wife, on the other hand, came from money. Her family was on a whole different level. Her dad owned some big businesses, and her mom threw charity dinners like it was her day job. When we first started dating, I could tell her parents didn't like me. They never said it out loud, but you could see it in the way they looked at me, the way her mom asked me questions about my future plans, like I was being interviewed for a job. Still, I loved their daughter, and she loved me. That's all that mattered to us. Or at least that's what I thought. When we got engaged, the family dropped the prenup bomb on me. I remember sitting in their massive living room with her dad practically glaring at me while their lawyer explained the terms. Basically, if we ever got divorced, she wouldn't owe me a dime, and I couldn't touch any of their family's money. At the time, I honestly didn't care. I wasn't marrying her for money, and I said as much. I was some broke college kid, and it's not like I was bringing anything to the table financially either. So why would I argue? I signed it without a second thought. I guess looking back, that was the first time I let them treat me like I was less. Like I didn't matter as much as her or their family name. But I brushed it off. I loved her. She loved me. And that was enough for me. Fast forward a couple of years. We got married, had our first kid, Christy, and life felt good. I was working my ass off at my job, pulling in a decent income while my wife stayed home with the baby. That was her choice. I was fine with it. Honestly, I was proud that I could provide enough to let her do what she wanted. We talked about hiring a nanny or daycare, but she said no. She wanted to be there for the kids, and I supported her. Over the next few years, we had 3 more kids, 2 boys, Jack and Daniel, and another girl, Jane. I won't lie, money was tight at times, but we always managed. I worked harder. She took care of the kids and the house. We were a team, or at least, I thought we were. During all of this, her family's money kept things easy for her. They'd send her monthly allowances or pay for things like vacations, clothes, or private schools for the kids. Her family's money meant she never had to worry about much. That was just the way things were. And honestly, I didn't mind. I was still contributing to the household. I paid for our house. I paid for groceries, bills, and whatever we needed to keep going. Then, about 10 years ago, her family's money started drying up. I don't know all the details, but there were lawsuits, some bad investments, and eventually, the allowances stopped. Her dad's businesses went under. Her mom lost her precious charities. It was like watching a slow train wreck, except it wasn't my problem. Around this time, my wife started to change. She didn't get a job. I didn't ask her to. I just assumed we'd keep going like we always had. But she started becoming bitter, complaining more about the things we didn't have, talking about how different life was before the money ran out. At the time, I thought she was just struggling with the transition. Her whole life before me was one of privilege. And now, she was living a life like everyone else. I thought we'd push through. I had no idea she'd throw everything away. Here's the part that stings the most. After 20 years of me being the stable one, of me being the provider while she stayed home, the prenup is screwing her, not me. She has no alimony rights because of it. That was part of the deal, and at the time, she and her family didn't think it'd ever matter. But now that she's cheated, now that I'm leaving her, she's realizing what that prenup actually means. The only thing we own together is our house. It's paid off, but the upkeep, taxes, and HOA fees are not cheap. Once the divorce is finalized and the house gets sold, she'll get her share of the proceeds, sure. But after that, she'll have to figure out what to do. I know that sounds harsh, but I'm done caring. She made her choices. I never wanted this. I married her because I loved her. I gave her 2 decades of my life. I helped her raise 4 amazing kids. I worked my ass off so she didn't have to worry about money. and she repaid me by throwing it all away for someone who probably doesn't even know what it's like to have a mortgage. I don't feel guilty for leaving her penniless, and I don't think I should. She didn't feel guilty when she cheated on me. Actions have consequences, and now she has to deal with them. I guess I should explain how I found out about the affair because, looking back, it almost feels surreal. Like, how did I miss the signs? Was I that blind? Or did I just not want to see it? I still go over it in my head, trying to pinpoint when exactly she started drifting away from me, when our marriage quietly fell apart while I was too busy to notice. It all started a few months ago. I'd been working later than usual. Work's been rough this year with layoffs and constant pressure to perform. So I was putting in extra hours, trying to make sure everything stayed afloat. My wife, meanwhile, seemed fine. She wasn't complaining about me working late like she used to, which, in hindsight, should have been a red flag. I just thought she was used to it after all these years. One night, I came home and she was on her phone laughing at something. She quickly put the phone down as I walked into the room. That's when I felt it. That weird gut feeling that something was off. I ignored it at first because, honestly, what could I say? Hey, I didn't like the way you laughed at your phone? It sounded insane. But that gut feeling didn't go away. Over the next few weeks, she got more and more secretive with her phone. She'd take it with her everywhere. Bathroom, kitchen, even out in the garden when she was watering plants. This was not like her. My wife was never tech-obsessed. She'd even make fun of me for being glued to my laptop sometimes. Now suddenly, her phone was her new best friend. I told myself I was imagining things. After 20 years, I thought I knew her better than anyone. I kept brushing the feeling off, convincing myself it was stress or paranoia. But then there were the weird errands. She started going out to run errands more often than usual. Always alone, always at odd times. I'd come home and the kids would say, "Mom just left to grab some groceries," or "She said she's picking up a gift for someone." The tipping point came when I saw her car parked at a strip mall across town one day. I had left work early, completely unplanned, because one of my meetings got canceled. I was driving through the area to grab lunch when I spotted our car. I figured she must have been shopping, but as I pulled into the lot, I saw her sitting in the car with someone in the passenger seat. I couldn't see his face, but I knew immediately it wasn't one of our kids. I froze. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't want to confront her right then and there. I don't even know why. Maybe I was scared of what I'd find out, or maybe I was trying to give her the benefit of the doubt. I just sat there for a minute, staring at the car, before I turned around and drove home. That night, I couldn't look at her the same. Every word she said, every smile she gave me felt fake, like I was seeing her through a completely different lens. It ate away at me, and I knew I had to find out the truth. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I'm also not sorry. I went through her phone. She'd left it charging in the kitchen while she was taking a shower, and I finally had the chance to look. The password hadn't changed, so I got in right away. The messages were all there. Dozens of texts to someone named Ryan. I read through everything, and my stomach dropped with each word. They'd been seeing each other for months. The texts weren't even careful. They were flirty, suggestive, and downright disgusting at times. Stuff like, "Can't wait to see you again," or "Last night was amazing." There were a few pictures too. Nothing graphic, but enough to tell me exactly what was going on. It felt like the ground disappeared beneath me. I stood there in the kitchen with my wife's phone in my hand, shaking. My head was pounding. I put the phone back exactly where I found it and walked outside because I couldn't breathe. I don't know how long I stood in the yard, staring at nothing, but eventually I went back inside. She came out of the bathroom with her hair wet and asked if I wanted to watch a movie later. She smiled at me. Smiled, like nothing had happened. That's what I can't get over. How easily she could lie to me, look me in the eyes, and pretend everything was fine. That night, I didn't say a word. I slept, or pretended to, on my side of the bed, while she snored softly next to me. I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do. Part of me wanted to wake her up right then and confront her, scream at her, demand answers. But another part of me felt numb, like if I stayed quiet long enough, maybe I could pretend I hadn't seen anything. The next day, I called a lawyer. I didn't say a word to my wife. I just left for work, sat in my car for an hour, and then found a divorce attorney who came highly recommended. I didn't want to play games. I wanted to know my options and what I could do to get out of this marriage as cleanly as possible. My lawyer was great. She walked me through everything calmly and told me I needed to act smart, not emotional. She said not to confront my wife yet and to start gathering evidence. The texts were a good start, but I needed more. So for the next week, I pretended everything was fine. I acted normal while quietly gathering proof, bank statements, her location history, screenshots of messages. I felt like a damn detective in my own house. It was the worst week of my life. Finally, I had enough. My lawyer filed the paperwork, and my wife got served the next morning. Her face when she opened the envelope is something I'll never forget. Shock, confusion, maybe even a little fear. She looked up at me, and all I said was, "I know." I didn't yell. I didn't explain. I just walked out of the room. I'll never forget that day because it was the last time I felt like my life was still somewhat in my control. Little did I know things were about to get even messier. I'll be honest, when I first found out about the affair, my biggest concern was keeping it between me and my wife. I didn't want my kids dragged into it. They didn't deserve this mess, and I didn't want to shatter their relationship with their mother. I figured the less they knew, the better. I thought I was protecting them. Of course, that's not how it went. The moment my wife got served with divorce papers, she decided to flip the script. Instead of dealing with what she'd done, she ran straight to our kids and turned on the waterworks. I wasn't there to see it firsthand, but apparently, she sat them all down in the living room and told them I was giving up on the family and rushing to divorce over one mistake. One mistake. That's how she described it. Like forgetting to take out the trash or being late for dinner. Jack, 18 million, our youngest, was the first to come to me about it. He's always been the no-nonsense kid of the family. He knocked on my office door one evening, sat down, and flat out asked me, "Dad, what's going on?" I tried to keep it simple. I said, "Your mom and I are having some serious issues, and we're not going to stay together." He nodded, processed it for a second, then asked, "Did she cheat?" The question hit me like a punch. I wasn't expecting him to put it together so fast, but Jack's always been sharper than people give him credit for. I didn't lie. I said, "Yes, she did." I saw the anger flash across his face, but he didn't say anything else. He just nodded again and left. That was the start of it. From there, the other kids started asking questions. Jane, 20F, texted me first. She's quieter than her siblings, more reserved, and I think she was trying to feel me out. She asked if it was true I'd filed for divorce. When I said yes, she just replied, "Okay." No follow-up, no judgment. Jane's always been the type to keep her thoughts to herself, but I could tell she was hurt. Daniel, 19 million, on the other hand, was more upset about the situation as a whole. He called me a few days later and asked if there was any way we could work it out for the family. I had to explain to him that trust is everything in a marriage, and once it's gone, you can't get it back. I told him I couldn't spend the rest of my life with someone who looked me in the eyes and lied to me. He seemed to understand, even if he didn't like it. Then there's Christy, 22F. I saved her for last because, honestly, her reaction has been the hardest for me to deal with. Christy has always been close to her mom, closer than she's ever been to me. That's not to say we didn't get along, but I was the strict parent, the one who made the rules and enforced them while my wife played the fun, easygoing mom. So I wasn't surprised when Christy took her side immediately, but it still hurt like hell. She showed up at my house one evening, practically demanding to talk to me. I let her in, and she wasted no time tearing into me. "Why are you doing this to Mom?" That's the first thing she said. Not a question about what happened, not asking for my side of the story, just accusing me. I stayed calm because, at the end of the day, she's still my daughter, and I love her. I told her the truth, plain and simple. Her mom cheated. I said I couldn't forgive that, and I wasn't going to pretend like everything was fine. Christy shook her head and started crying. But she's sorry. She knows she messed up, and she wants to fix it. I couldn't hold back at that point. I told her, "Christy, this isn't something you fix. This isn't a broken plate you can glue back together. Your mom made choices that destroyed this marriage. I'm not going to stay married to someone who doesn't respect me." She looked at me like I'd slapped her. "You're just giving up," she said. "You're destroying this family because you're too proud to forgive her." That's what broke me. I wanted to yell. I wanted to scream that I'd given 20 goddamn years to this marriage, and her mother was the one who destroyed it. I bit my tongue, though, because yelling wouldn't solve anything. Instead, I told her, "Christy, I love you, but this is between your mother and me. You don't understand everything, and it's not your job to fix it." She left angry, and for the next few weeks, every time I heard from her, it was more of the same. Pleading, crying, and begging me to give her mom another chance. I kept offering to pay for therapy for her because I knew she was hurting, but she wouldn't take it. She just kept telling me there wouldn't be anything to cope with if I'd stop the divorce. At this point, I had to limit contact with her for my own mental health. It killed me to do it, but I couldn't keep having the same argument with her every day. I told her I'd talk to her again once things calmed down, but until then, I needed space. The other kids stayed neutral for the most part. Jack stopped talking to his mom entirely after he found out about the cheating. Jane tried to stay out of it, but I could tell she was quietly supporting me. Daniel was torn, I think, but he kept his distance from both of us. My wife, though, she saw all of this as leverage. She knew Christy's reaction would get to me, so she used her to try to manipulate me. Suddenly, Christy was sending me long texts about how much her mom regretted what she did, how she deserved a second chance, and how I was being unfair. I knew exactly where those words were coming from. It wasn't Christy, it was her mother. That was the moment I realized my wife wasn't just trying to save our marriage. She was trying to save herself. She knew the prenup screwed her over, and now she was weaponizing our kids to pressure me. That realization made me angrier than anything else. It was like she didn't care how much damage she was causing, as long as she got what she wanted. I wish I could say I handled this perfectly, but I didn't. Watching my kids get dragged into this mess, seeing Christy fight me while my wife pulled the strings, it broke something in me. I felt like I was losing my family piece by piece, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do to stop it. If you've been following my story, you already know that things were bad. But what happened at Jane's birthday took everything to another level. It's the kind of night I'll never forget, no matter how much I wish I could. Jane turned 20 a couple of weeks ago, and we'd planned a small family dinner at my house. Nothing fancy, just the kids, a cake, and some pizza. Something casual since Jane's not the big party type. I knew it was going to be awkward, because it was the first time my wife and I would be in the same room since I filed for divorce. I also hadn't spoken much to Christy since our last fight. But I figured everyone could suck it up for one night. It was Jane's birthday after all. A couple of days before, I texted Christy and my wife to let them know my one ground rule. Don't bring up the divorce. I told them this was for Jane, and I wasn't going to let our issues ruin her day. I thought I'd covered my bases. Christy never replied to my text, and my wife didn't either. That should have been my first clue that things were going to go sideways. The day of the dinner, everyone showed up. My wife was the last to arrive, which was typical for her. She always had to make an entrance. She walked in with Christy right behind her, and immediately I felt the tension. My wife smiled at me like nothing had happened, and Christy didn't even look at me. I kept my mouth shut because I wasn't about to start a fight. Dinner itself was tense. The kids were trying their best to keep the mood light, cracking jokes and talking about work or school, but you could feel it. It's hard to describe, but it was like there was this invisible weight sitting on all of us. Every time my wife said something, it felt forced, like she was trying too hard to act normal. Christy was quiet, which isn't like her at all. She usually talks everyone's ear off, but that night, she barely said 2 words. Then, we got to the cake. Jane seemed happy enough. I was trying my best to focus on her, to make her feel celebrated even if things were awkward. But as soon as the candles were blown out and we started cutting the cake, my wife decided that was the perfect moment to start her little speech. "Isn't it nice to have the family all together again?" she said, raising her glass like we were at some perfect family dinner in a movie. "It's so important to put aside differences and come together for the people we love." I froze. I could feel the blood rushing to my face because I knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't about Jane or her birthday. This was about the divorce. She was trying to guilt trip me in front of our kids, and the worst part is she was doing it under the guise of being a loving mother. The room went silent. I glanced at Jane, and she looked down at her plate, clearly uncomfortable. Jack, my youngest, was the first to break the silence. "Are you serious right now?" he said, glaring at my wife. "You couldn't just keep it to yourself for one night?" My wife tried to play innocent. "What? I'm just saying it's good to be together. That's all." Jack wasn't having it. "No, you're not. You're making everything about you, like always." That's when Christy jumped in. "She's not making it about her," she snapped at Jack. "She's trying to fix things. She's the only one who's trying to keep this family together." At this point, my head was pounding. I wanted to stop it before it turned into a full-blown fight, so I said, "Enough! This isn't the time or the place." But it was too late. Jane, who had been quiet all night, suddenly slammed her fork down on the table. "Oh my God, just stop!" she yelled. "Christy, you're only on Mom's side because you helped her cheat." The entire room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. I turned to Jane, stunned. "What did you just say?" I asked. Jane looked angry, angrier than I'd ever seen her. She turned toward Christy. "You knew, didn't you? You knew about Mom's affair, and you helped her hide it." I looked at Christy, and I swear she went pale. She didn't say a word. She just sat there, looking guilty as hell. That's when I realized Jane was telling the truth. My own daughter, my oldest child, had known about the affair. Not only that, She'd actively helped her mother cover it up. I can't even describe what I felt in that moment. It wasn't just anger, it was betrayal on top of betrayal. It was like the knife in my back got twisted all over again. I looked at Christy and asked, "Is that true? Did you know?" She didn't answer. She didn't deny it. She just sat there, looking down at her lap. My wife tried to jump in and deflect. "Let's not do this right now," she said, her voice shaky. "This isn't the time." Jack cut her off. "Are you kidding me? You did this and now Christy helped you? You're unbelievable." The whole dinner turned into chaos. Jane stormed out of the room. Jack was yelling at Christy, and Daniel was just sitting there, completely stunned. I didn't know what to do. I was too angry, too hurt, too overwhelmed to even process what was happening. I stood up, looked at Christy and said, "We're done talking for now. I can't even look at you." Then I walked out. I sat in my car for probably an hour that night, trying to process it all. My wife had betrayed me, but Christy? I never thought she'd be capable of something like this. I get that she's close to her mom, but covering up an affair? Helping her lie to me? That's something I don't think I can ever forgive. When I went back inside, the house was quiet. Everyone had left. I sat in the dark for a while, feeling like everything I'd built was crumbling around me. That night, I decided I couldn't keep trying to fix things with Christy. Not now. Not after this. I'd already lost my wife, and now I felt like I'd lost my daughter too. After Jane's birthday dinner blew up, I spent the next few days in a fog. I barely slept. I'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that would go cold, just staring at nothing. The silence in my house, which used to feel comforting after a long day, now felt heavy and suffocating. It's weird how everything can look the same, but nothing feels the same anymore. The truth is, what Jane revealed about Christy broke me in a way I didn't think was possible. I always assumed that if my marriage ever fell apart, and let's be honest, no one thinks it will, my kids would still be my anchor. I figured no matter what happened between me and their mother, they'd at least understand I did everything I could for this family. But finding out that Christy, my oldest daughter, the one I carried on my shoulders as a toddler and stayed up late helping with homework as a teenager, knew about the affair and helped cover it up, that hit me like a freight train. I couldn't wrap my head around it. How do you even process something like that? Was she lying to my face all these months too? How long had she known? Did she sit at the dinner table with me, laughing at my jokes, while knowing her mother was sneaking around behind my back? It made me question everything. Every hug, every "I love you," every conversation we'd ever had. It all felt tainted. I didn't want to believe Jane at first. I hoped she'd been mistaken, that maybe she'd misunderstood something. But when I replayed the look on Christy's face that night, how pale she went, how she didn't deny it, I knew. She couldn't even look me in the eye. And her silence told me everything I needed to know. The next morning, I tried to distract myself. I went for a long drive with no destination, just circling the outskirts of town with the windows down. It didn't help. Everywhere I looked, I was reminded of my family, of the life I thought I'd built. The gas station I'd taken Christy to when she was learning to drive. The park where we used to have picnics. The ice cream shop the kids loved when they were younger. It was like my entire town was mocking me. When I got back home, I sat down and tried to write Christy a text. I thought maybe I could calmly ask her why. Why she'd do this. Why she'd betray me like that. But every time I started typing, my anger took over. I'd start with, "How could you?" and then delete it. I'd try something softer like, "Can we talk?" But that felt pointless. What was there to say? I knew I'd just end up yelling, and I didn't want that. So I didn't send anything. I spent most of that day replaying memories of Christy in my head. When she was little, she used to sit in my lap and tell me I was her hero. I was the one who took her to her first concert when she was 13. I remember how happy she was, holding my hand the entire time, because the crowd was so big, and she didn't want to get lost. She used to call me for advice about boys or college classes when she moved out. So how did we get here? How did I become the villain in her eyes? I keep thinking maybe I wasn't enough of a dad to her. Maybe I worked too much. Maybe I didn't spend enough time bonding with her, and that's why she sided with her mom so easily. I don't know. I'll probably never know. That evening, I finally broke down. I'll admit it. I'm not ashamed. I cried like I haven't cried since I lost my own father. It wasn't just about my wife anymore. It was about my daughter. I've always been the type of guy who holds things together for everyone else, but I couldn't hold it in anymore. I was grieving the family I thought I had, the trust I thought we shared. It felt like I'd lost everything all at once. After that, I decided I needed to make a choice. I couldn't keep sitting in my house feeling sorry for myself. I couldn't keep driving myself crazy replaying what Christy did or why she did it. I love her. She's my daughter, But I realized that I can't fix this right now. She made her choice, and I can't let her guilt trip me into fixing a marriage that's already dead. I texted her the next morning. It wasn't long, just, "Christy, I love you, but I need space right now. I can't talk about this until I've had time to process. I hope you understand." She didn't respond. It hurt not to hear back, but in a weird way, it also gave me some peace. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was taking control of something. Christy wants to blame me for breaking up the family, but I refuse to carry that burden. I didn't cheat. I didn't lie. I didn't drag her into this mess. Her mother did that, and if Christy wants to ignore that fact, that's on her, not me. I've also decided to focus on the kids who do understand. Jack hasn't talked to his mom since Jane's birthday. He's angry, but I can tell he's also trying to hold himself together. I talked to him briefly about what happened, and he just said, "Mom screwed up. That's not on you." Hearing him say that made me realize I'm not alone. Jane's been quiet since her outburst, but I pulled her aside the other day to check on her. I told her I was proud of her for standing up for what was right, even if it caused a scene. She teared up a little and said, "I just wanted the truth to come out." I hugged her, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe things would be okay. Daniel's still keeping his distance, but I know he'll come around eventually. He's always been the middle ground kid, and I don't blame him for not wanting to take sides. As for my wife, I haven't spoken to her directly since Jane's birthday. My lawyer handles everything now, and I plan to keep it that way. The less contact I have with her, the better. I don't know what the future looks like with Christy. Maybe one day she'll realize what she did, and we can rebuild our relationship. Or maybe we'll never recover from this. All I know is that I can't force her to see the truth, and I can't let her guilt manipulate me anymore. For now, I'm taking it one day at a time and trying to focus on the kids who are still here for me.